Hey guys, welcome to part two of my chat with poet, author, and podcaster Megha Rao. In this part of my conversation with her, I speak to her about how we should all honestly not have FOMO and really want to miss out. And more than anything else, how do we deal with creator burnout, something which a lot of us deal with, and so much more. But I get into that conversation with Megha Rao on Take a Pause with me, Varun Duggirala, I want you to hit subscribe and smash that bell icon, and then we'll hit play on my chat with Megha Rao. I don't know when the flip happens. I don't know if it's about age. And I want to ask you that at which point do you feel that it was a flip from okay, this is what I'm doing because this seems to be what everyone does to being okay, this is something which I've innately like understood what my voice inside is and almost like figuring out. I mean, because I think poetry, especially, and this is a long-winding question to when even I'm figuring out where I'm going with this. Is that
While you're asking the question.
yeah? Because poetry in the modern world is at an interesting space because I got introduced to a few people saying they're their favorite Instagram poets, and now that's a thing, right? But how do you find the way to put it out into the world being different from how it might have been when you started off? And I know it's been a period of time for you, but um how have you kind of seen that change how you write? Sorry, long
I
question.
think by trying different things,
Hmm.
I mean, you should be thankful that I understood your question.
This is the problem. This is the problem when you start saying things and you go into a different direction and you come back to it and you suddenly say, one second, where's the question? What was I trying to say? So yeah, so how you seen the way you broadcast things out there into the world really affect what you put down?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer this in 2 points because one thing you asked me was how to just like break out of that stereotype or whatever like people put you in a box. They're like, oh, she's a spoken word poet. No, she's an
Yeah,
Instagram poet. No, she's just a poet. You don't know. And now that I have like a book out with HarperCollins,
yeah.
they're like, oh, okay, that's page poetry. And I find that really confusing. And I think for me, oh, and then someone also called me, oh, you're that podcast poet. And I was really confused.
Mm,
Like, I was not, I don't know how I felt because for me, I think hearing all these terms, it's like someone else is deciding your identity for you.
mm,
And I found myself losing my free will there. And I didn't want that. But at the same time, I think to break out of like one stereotype, I started doing a lot of things, right? That's why I started doing a podcast. And it wasn't necessarily because I wanted to break out of that, but more because I just wanted to try out something new.
mm,
Even when I started performing, even when I started like doing a podcast, I knew at the heart of it, it would be poetry. Um, because I am in love with poetry, and I know that whatever I do, it's going to find its way there in some way. But I was thirsty to experiment with everything, and that's kind of what helped me get past a particular stereotype. Like I wasn't boxed in because I was trying out so many new things, and just having like a generally good time. But apart from that, how do I detach myself from being influenced
yeah.
by, let's say, external voices? Is I think one of it is definitely this break that I'm taking for
Mm,
sure. And by that, I'm not going to define what it is because I'm allowing myself to, if I want to go back and like do a performance tomorrow itself, or like put something out tomorrow itself, that's totally fine. I'm not limiting myself, but I'm allowing myself to also, step back from it to look at the larger picture because I was never the kind of person who would just create and create and create
mm,
to like to to find myself in a loop. I wouldn't do that. I think I would only share something if I was genuinely excited about it.
mm,
If I wrote a poem and I thought, hey, this is good, I like what I wrote, then I would put it out there. But at the same time, I didn't want to be stuck in that loop, because I think at one point I sat myself down and I told myself, Megha, you're not the kind of person who can. There may be people who can write every day and, share their work with the public every day. I know so many spoken word poets who, given a brief, they'll be able to write a poem, memorize that, and
Mm.
perform it the next day in front of camera.
Yeah.
And I need like almost like 2 months to even put myself in front of a camera. And I definitely need a month to memorize a poem, because I can memorize it in like 15 minutes. But
Mm.
I don't know if I don't, it's impossible for me to stand in front of a crowd and say that, because I need it as muscle memory. Like I need to be like, even if I'm free, like frozen with fear on stage, the words should still tumble out, and that's why I need like that long a time period to prepare myself. So I told myself I can't do it. If I do that, someone else, if they do it every day, they may still come up with something great. Maybe there are people out there who can do quantity and quality. I just wasn't that person. I mean, I had to move at my own pace, and that's something I realized. If I didn't, I knew that I was not going to create a legacy, and that's something I had told myself, that when I write, I'm not just going to write. I'm here. I'm going to create a legacy, and that's what I want. I don't want to be here for everyday validation. So I think a lot of it has to just do with self awareness. It's like you wake up every day and you hold on to that sliver of self awareness, and that's just it.
Talking about self awareness, I think also it kind of comes down to what really drives you in your creative process, right? So, if I go deep down into that part, especially because you are doing it in, I would say, three different mediums. There's the writing part, which is obviously the most. I find writing to be the most interesting one of all. I have found that to be the most gratifying, because you're not worried. You're really sitting there and just doing it with yourself, right? It's just what's there. Then comes the podcast part, which is a narrational part. It's still you adding a few more people into the mix, but it's still, you can do it in a cocoon. You don't necessarily have to be out there. And then there's the stage, which is like you're in front of hundreds of people doing that. So after all these three, do you feel that you need to find different things to drive you when you're doing each of these, or does it innately kind of stick to the same point? Or do you find different drivers for each of them?
No, it's very different for me, at least. With writing, it's just the most intimate, personal process, and also extremely easy. When people ask me, how do you write about such difficult themes, like,
Yeah.
does it affect you, how do you feel about it? And I never thought about it like that. For me, I think when you're just spilling, it's kind of vital, that kind of catharsis. So for me, writing that way has always been this weapon. It's been medicine. But then take it to the next step, right? Performing for audio. Nobody's really watching. It's still, like you
Yeah.
said, cocooned. I also really like that, because that way I feel like I'm just talking to myself. So I get to, like, add really personal elements, like, like maybe it's that small giggle in between two words. Maybe it's that sucking in your breath at, like, after pausing. Maybe it could be anything. Okay, it could be a whisper, it could be anything. Versus going up on stage, I mean, there are two kinds of stages, right? One is like it's still like an intimate setting where
Mhm.
you're inside a space, and then of
Yeah.
course there's like this stage where it's facing this ground and it's outside. Wow,
Yeah.
that one still scares me like anything. The normal stage, the intimate one, I would still say, okay, you can still get to do what you do with the podcast, but now you're also burdened with looking into the eyes of a lot of people, and eye contact is so important for that, for performance.
So true.
So yeah, like you're talking to all these strangers, you're bearing yourself. It's a bit intimidating, but I mean, that's how it started out for me, extremely intimidating. But with time, I also realized that it was such a transcendental process for me. Like, it was phenomenal being up there, and you feel like you're looking back at the universe, and I just I thought it was so powerful. And being on an open ground kind of stage, oh, the effect is like a million times more. And I know it. I know that one time when, there were like thousands of people on ground, there's like watching, and, I'm performing this 8-minute piece, and
Mm.
I could slip any moment. I know that because, there are many times when you're yelling and your voice cracks. You don't know, and it was that kind of a piece, and it was really fast in some places, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't want to slip. But I think when you've spent 2-3 months preparing for it every day, like this is what you've waited for all your like life, that disappears. I think for me that's what it was. When I go up on stage, every single time when I go up on stage, which is why I try my best not to do it too often, because that kind of destroys it for me. I
Mm.
want to do it rarely, because then I feel the passion. So every time I go up on stage, it feels like, I don't know, like it's very different. It's very, like I said, transcendental. It feels otherworldly. Like I'm in space, and like I'm spacewalking. And I remember after it was done, I went all the way back to the, like, the ground lawn, and I just like lay there,
Mm.
and I was facing the sky, and it was at night, and there were stars, and I was like, this is as close as I can get to the stars. And I think it gives you this very strange kind of high that, you just feel this adrenaline rush. And I think that's the difference for me. Everything's equally beautiful,
Yeah.
but I think stage is what has given me that kind of adrenaline rush, especially when like you're performing poetry that you've written, and it's so personal, and oh, whoa, it's just something else.
You also make an interesting point, right? Is that mm, people try, and I think because of, I think it's partially FOMO, it's partially many other things for a lot of us. We say, okay, this is the most impactful thing, so let me do more of this. This is what I can do easily, so let me just make it like, the tendency to make anything into daily content is so high. Like I struggle with trying to have a calendar because I don't want to have a calendar, but at sometimes I know I need to have a calendar to organize my own head. So when you look at this exact point of saying not doing everything all the time, but really spacing it out, do you feel that's like a great driver to also find more things to put out? Like in terms of like, does it give you more sparks because you are spacing things out, that you are bringing that energy, like you said, rather than just like almost like burning yourself out? I feel is what happens a lot these days.
Yeah, it happens. People burn out. They don't give themselves enough time to recover from it. You're right. People have this fear of missing out. But that book that your sister gave you, um, so Jenny Odell says that there's something called NOMO, which means necessity of missing out,
Mm-hmm.
which is so vital to for all of us, and it's something that everyone should do once in a while, to just miss out and not feel like you're being isolated, or that someone's going to forget you. I think that's the biggest fear for a lot of artists in this century, right, or this era. We are so scared of being forgotten.
Mm.
Why? Maybe because we ourselves forget most of the content that we put out. To be honest, there's so much that we put out. Like, I think about my catalog, whatever I've written, there are forgettable poems. Like, if I think back, I can only name a handful of poems that stuck with me. And that's going to happen a lot more if we keep putting stuff out all the time. We can. I mean, honestly, it's great if
Mm.
there's no gatekeeping here. It's not like you can only put your best work out, everything else is like, oh, put it to a side, throw it in the bin. No, no, no. It's great if you're sharing everything, but it also really restricts you, because like you said, you're going to hit that burnout real soon. You're just creating and creating and creating, and it's so unhealthy. Like, it's
Mm.
genuinely so unhealthy, not just on an emotional level but also on a creative level. It's not good for your creative health.
How do you look at competition? Because I feel oftentimes what we also feel is, oh, this is how people are doing it, or we come up with people who we think are competitors because they're also in the same space. So every time, like, I know that sometimes people say, okay, look at this, what this podcaster is doing, or what this entrepreneur is creating as content, etc. Suddenly, at the back of my head, I know there is competition. As much as I don't want to admit it, I know it's there. How do you look at competition? Does that play on your mind, or are you saying no? I don't necessarily let that affect me.
For me, competition is always, I think about it in a very, I don't know. I think that I just, if someone grabs my attention
Mm,
that way, I I would like to be inspired by them rather than trying to like imitate them or like
mm,
doing what they do, or you know figuring out what their formula is, what's that secret ingredient that they have that it's working, and then you just become bitter. And I feel like this competitive culture is, it's, I mean, competition is important because
yeah.
if there was no competition we would all be like, I don't know, I know a lot of us wouldn't push us to our highest potential.
Mm,
um but healthy competition is like, the kind of competition where you feel inspired by someone, and you also like recommend them to someone. Like you hear about someone, shouldn't be like, oh, they're doing well, oh, I want to do that well, I hate. Like it's more like, it's like I remember reading this person's, oh, I kind of lurk around Reddit a lot. So I remember like reading this person's opinion where they were like, jealousy is when you're like, I don't want that person to have that.
mm,
And envy is like, I want what that person has.
yeah.
And I think that that's still reasonably healthy because you're still aspiring to reach somewhere versus you thinking, oh, they have that and I don't want them to have it. Only
Mm,
I should have it. I think we should all just like build each other up.
yeah.
I think that's I think that's beautiful, and I think that's very healthy, and I think that it's also like necessary. I think that's as positive could get.
Didn't that give you a lot to think about? Now, if you want to soak in more of this conversation, don't forget to hit subscribe and smash that bell icon. And part three of my chat with Megha Rao will be coming out very soon. Till then, think about this a little bit and take a pause.